At midnight on this last day of summer, 12 men of Ness will sail north for 40 miles to an isolated, cruel Atlantic rock called Sulis. That lonely rock has attracted the Ness men for centuries past. They go there every year for a strange September harvest.
In the far north of the Isle of Lewis lies the community of Ness. Every year, 10 men from here set sail for the desolate Isle of Sulisker, far out in the Atlantic. This is the last place in the European Union where young gannets, known as guga, are hunted for their meat. I was privileged to be one of the very few outsiders ever to accompany the guga hunters, and the first for nearly 50 years allowed to film this closed tradition. My brother and I skippered our own boat to follow the hunt. We soon found out that the voyage to Sulisker is a long, tough sail through almost continual gales. So I was surprised to discover that the hunters don't go for money or for sport. They take 2 weeks off work to go and bring back 2,000 birds, not simply for the sake of a tradition that stretches back centuries, but because the meat of the guga is considered a rare and celebrated delicacy in Ness.
Great lads go with me to Sulisker, and they feel as passionate as I do about it. We're also protecting a way of life, and for the hundreds of people who love the guga, well, that's why we do it.
Hello again from the Richard and Judy Book Club, exclusive to W.H. Smith, and we're here today to talk about this cracking novel. It's by Peter May. It's called The Black House, and on the front cover it says "Evil lies within," and it certainly does. It's set on Lewis, mostly, way off the coast of the UK. It's a great setting, Peter, and you write evocatively about Lewis and an island life, and it makes me wonder if you've actually lived there or experienced it.
Well, I basically lived there for 5 months a year for 5 years when I was producing a drama series that I'd created for Scottish television.
Which one? What was it
It
called?
was called Macher, but it was in the Gaelic language.
Oh, right.
Which
So you speak Gaelic, do you?
I don't
You do
speak Gaelic. That's the weirdest thing. But,
So you spent a long time there then?
yeah. 5 months a year, 5 years, kind of locked on the island because, you know, in those days you couldn't get off at the weekends because there was no Sunday ferry, there was no Sunday flight.
Well, there's that far in Scotland, and I've spent some time in the very far north of Scotland myself. Sundays, nothing happens. I mean, they still observe the Sabbath, don't they?
Oh, very much.
Massively.
And the Isle of Lewis was, you know, when I first arrived there, I think my first visit was 1990. We arrived on the Saturday, and on the Sunday we went out looking for lunch.
Forget it.
Nothing was open. No pubs, no restaurants. You couldn't buy cigarettes if you wanted cigarettes. You couldn't get petrol for your car. Everything was shut. Absolutely everything.
Well, tell us about the story. The hero is a Scottish police detective called Finn MacLeod, and this is the first of a trilogy. He's going to appear two more times in two more novels.
Yes, yeah.
Well, just give us a thumbnail sketch of the plot.
It's detective who has come from the island, born and brought up there, who, like many islanders, got away at the first opportunity, in his case, to go to university. But he ended up on the police force on the mainland. And for various reasons, personal reasons, he's never wanted to go back. But a particular murder which has taken place in Edinburgh is replicated on the island.
And just to interrupt, the various personal reasons that he doesn't want to go back are the subject of the novel, because you go back to his childhood as well as the time. So there's this terrible murder on the Isle of Lewis.
We can say a bit about it because it's in the first chapter. It's a horrible murder. It's the body of a man's found. He's been strung up and eviscerated.
Yes.
As you say, it echoes an earlier killing a few months earlier, or maybe a year ago, in Edinburgh. So your hero, because he's born and brought up on the island, is sent out there because he's the obvious guy for the job. He knows the locals.
Yes. Yeah. And that journey back for him is not only an investigation, but it's a journey back through his life. And he and we discover all those characters that he grew up with, which are related in some way to the final resolution of the story.
It strikes me, reading about all the characters that he meets again, in many cases for the first time since he left as a teenager, that living on an island like that must be like living in a bubble. Time seems to stop. When he goes back, he finds that none of them have really moved on at all in their lives. They're all the same people doing the same things.
I think that's very much the case when you live in a literally insular community like that, that life just does go on in very much the same way, day after day, month after month, year after year, which is why they want to get away.
And the ones that do get away, like Finn, are sort of in some ways quite resented by their own peers, the people they grew up with,
The
who are
ones who are
still
left
stuck
behind,
there,
yes,
behind. Why did you decide, I won't reveal what it is, although it happens right at the beginning, so it's not, but why did you decide to start the story with such a terrible tragedy happening to Finn?
I think it had to, his story had to develop out of personal tragedy, because his life in a way has been fairly tragic. He's like many of us. He's made mistakes, taken the wrong turning at almost every crossroads. And here is a cathartic moment in his life where his son is killed in a hit and run road accident. And if anything was going to propel him out of this escape that he's been living in for the last 18 years, it's something like that.
The book sort of orbits and gets closer and closer to an extraordinary event, which is based on real life, called, let me get this right, the Guga. And this is an annual tradition which goes back hundreds of years on Lewis, where the fishermen, go out to a bare rock about, what, 50 miles out to sea?
Yes.
And slaughter, is it gannets?
It's baby gannets.
Baby gannets, for food. And they cure them and they take them back, and it's a rare delicacy, which outsiders hate, but people on Lewis love. Now, this is absolutely pivotal to the book,
yes.
This hunt, both in the past and in the present day. You write about it magnificently. I mean, you really do. I mean, again, it struck me, you must have been on this hunt, but you say not.
No, it's a kind of closed circle. I mean, there are these 10 or 12 men from Ness on the northwest of Lewis who make this journey every August out to Sulasker, is the name of the actual island. I call it Ansker in the book. Sulasker is, I think, literally is Gaelic and Norse for the Gannet Rock.
Gannet Rock, right.
Ansker is literally the rock.
Right.
And the Guga is the young gannet. That's the Gaelic name for the young gannet. And they've been making this trip for 400 years. And originally they did it, because out of necessity, because they needed to eat. And this was the only place that they could get food at that point. Now it has evolved into a tradition, and it's much more like a rite of passage.
You mean for young men?
For young men,
yeah.
And so they make this trip every year. They are limited for conservation reasons to killing 2,000 birds.
How do they kill them?
Well, it's a kind of bloody process, really, but actually quick. It sounds worse than it.
It's sort of garrote, isn't it?
Well, they're hit in the head very, very, very. I mean, a single blow kills them, and then the bird is passed to the next in line, who decapitates them.
Right.
And the rock ends up being, it starts off white, covered with guano, and ends up red, covered with blood. So it's a pretty gory process.
And they spend quite a long time there, don't they?
The 2 weeks, and there's nothing on the rock. There's no fresh water. There's no power. They have to take everything with them.
So really, the central thing which happens on the rock when Finn went there is actually sort of the levels of stress which must exist on that rock for 2 weeks with nothing there must be very, very high.
I think they are, and they're taken out by trawler and dropped there, and then the trawler goes. And they're there, and they're left, I think, with a kind of CB radio for emergencies, and quite often that doesn't work. So they really are on their own, totally isolated out there.
It's extraordinary that it still goes on.
I know.
It really is.
Hi, I'd like to tell you a story. It's one that broke my heart and has a lot to do with this book. When I write a book, I like to give it my heart and soul. It was different with this one. I gave, yes, but it took as well. Sucked the life out of me somehow, reduced me to tears, left me in a strange, contradictory way, both hollow and fulfilled. When I had finished, I knew deep down inside it was the best book I had ever written. I was excited, elated, moved. But that's not what broke my heart. Full of anticipation, I sent the book to my agent. He loved it. He prepared his submission list and sent it to all the top publishers in Britain. It was winter. I spent those waiting weeks working in the garden, clearing away the dead growth. Then one by one the publishers responded. These were quotes that would have graced the cover of any bestseller. The trouble is, they were all rejections. Every single one of them rejected it. I sank into a deep depression. I knew it was the best thing I had ever written, but nobody wanted to publish it. My New York agent had issues with the structure and wanted me to rewrite. When I refused, she wouldn't even show it to publishers in the US. Frustrated, heartbroken, defeated, I filed it away both physically and mentally and moved on to other things. Until about 2 years ago. In a casual conversation with my French publisher at a book fair, I happened to mention the best book I'd ever written that nobody wanted to publish. She said, "Send it to me." So I did. 6 weeks later, she phoned me and said, "I adore this book. I want to buy world rights." Well, I was confounded. It's unheard of for a French publisher to buy world rights in a book written in English. But of course I said yes. Nearly bit her hand off. Someone, at last, had seen the potential in my child. Well, the book went straight into translation and came out in France just over a year ago, to the best reviews of my career. Then on the eve of the big international book fair at Frankfurt, where all the major book deals are done, the rights lady at the French publishing house called me. She thought she should read the book before taking it to Frankfurt. She said, "I started it last night and couldn't put it down until I'd finished at 5 o'clock this morning." And she made me this promise. Frankfurt is going to be the week of the Black House. You cannot imagine how thrilled I was to hear that. And true to her word, it was. The top publisher in Italy bought it after reading it overnight. 6 German publishers got into a bidding war over it. The Spanish bought it. The Greeks. The Russians. Then in the strangest twist of fate, it was bought by the Brits. Not any of those publishers who had turned it down, but a dynamic young publishing house which had just taken Stieg Larsson's Millennium Trilogy to the top of every bestsellers list in the world. Quercus, Quercus, Quercus. My new editor at Quercus sent me an email in which he described the book as brilliant and beautiful. But all these publishers who had bought the book still weren't satisfied. They wanted more. And in the end, I was persuaded to turn it into a trilogy. So here it is at last, The Black House. And now I have another story to tell you. Finally, the story of the Black House itself. I hope it moves you the way it has moved me.